I'm Jen West, professional rebel of delight.
And I'm Dave Wiesdock, sage of creative scaffolding.
And this is Shadowcasting. So Dave, we've been pretty practical in our last few podcasts, talking about values, talking about priorities of the year. And I thought we'd get a little woo-woo and still try to keep it practical. What do you say?
Oh, I say challenge accepted.
It's easy to stay practical at the beginning, but it gets a little crazy at the end. Today, I would like to talk about levels of consciousness.
Levels of consciousness.
Dave in space.
That's 1,000% what I was going for.
Oh, it was perfect. So I first heard about the levels of consciousness in a book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. It's a new paradigm for sustainable success. And this book talks about either being in a victim mentality or being in a mentality where you take responsibility for your world and your work and how you lead. And so it's a brilliant book. I highly recommend it. I'm going to put the 15 commitments in a link in our notes, in our description. So take a look at those because it's really worth it. The levels of consciousness, when we think about it, they're different states that we can be in anytime throughout the day. But most of the time we live in the very first level. And the first level is life happens to me. And this is a state where circumstances happen to you and you're not really in control of things. Things happen to you and then you react to them. Level 2 is life happens by me. And this is where we start owning our world a little bit more, going out, achieving, getting stuff done, just owning our world a little bit more. Then there's level 3, and this is life happens through me. And this is where it's more of that flow state and stuff comes from inside and then moves out. And then the final level is life happens as me. And this one is kind of that magical, super woo-woo where you just are life. That's the only way I can describe it. I don't spend much time there. So.
Yeah. When I was first introduced to these 4 levels, I instantly fell in love with them. I think especially with these levels, what kind of comes to mind for me, and I think you made a note about this as well, that I feel like most of us spend time at levels 1 and 2. That kind of seems like our auto default. I think it's a little bit easier to get to those levels. And what I mean is like the healthier version of those levels, right? One of the things that I love is that the book is called The 15 Commitments of Leadership. But then we started just talking about 4 levels of consciousness. And so there's 2 things happening here. What's happening is the conscious leadership, there's commitments to things that should really sound familiar to our audience. It's commitments to play and rest. It's commitments to responsibility. It's commitments to, I forget what the other one is.
Oh, God, there's so many. There are 15 of them.
Yeah, there's 15 of them.
We've got, we'll go through a couple. The first one is responsibility. The second one is curiosity.
Oh,
the third one is feelings. The fourth one is candor. The fifth one is gossip. And the sixth one is integrity. And they just keep going on and on. But let me give an example for curiosity. So in the consciousness leadership group, all they play with is the to me, that victim state, or the by me, the responsibility state. So they don't go into the other 2 levels of consciousness. They're just deciding if you are in the to me state or if you are in the by me state. And they have examples of what those would mean. So for curiosity, their example is a by me state where you're taking responsibility is I commit to grow in self-awareness. I commit to regarding every interaction as an opportunity to learn. I commit to curiosity as a path to rapid learning. That's if you're above the line. They call it above the line and below the line. I'm getting ahead of myself. So in that one, you are taking responsibility of your curiosity. You're willing to look. The victim state would be, I commit to being right and to see this situation as something that happens to me. I commit to being defensive, especially when I am certain that I am right. So one is like curious, maybe I'm not right. And the other one is I am right and I will fight you for it.
Yeah, I think it's worth reiterating that above and below the line too. It's the responsibility, the by me is above the line, and then the victim, the to me is below the line, correct? So there's kind of the two different levels within each of the 15 commitments.
Yeah, they really go between the to me versus the by me. And they point out at the beginning of the book that to me is not a bad state. It's a natural state for survival. It's a human state. It's the one we're most used to because if you want to survive, you need to be right and you need to be on the lookout and you need to be defending yourself, and your circumstances can happen to you. You could get eaten by a lion. So things can happen to you. So the main point of that book is no state is wrong. These aren't levels as in you live in this level and then you grow up and you live in this level and then you grow up and you live in this next level. They're levels you bounce depending on circumstances and what's most appropriate. So none's right or wrong. And it feels better to live in at least the by me. It feels like you have control. You have more power in your life. You don't feel like everything's eating away at you.
I really like that. And I feel like personally, that's where we focus a lot for our shadow casting, right? A lot of our material is geared towards how do we create a life by me? Well, and actually, I'll take that one step further. We take an assessment of what is happening to us and we move to a space of how do we create what's happening by us. And I think that shift from one to the other isn't a judgment in either, because there's, like you said, benefits in being in both levels. It's just we're trying to kind of expand the perspective a bit, because when we take on that responsibility, that's where a lot of our power and our magic casting comes in from the shadow.
Yeah. We're really moving people to where they live more in the by me state. So a lot of our shadow casting is how do we become aware of when we are in the state where things are happening to me, and how can we transition to where our natural state of being is in that I have responsibility and I have a level of control and I can create my world more. It's an active facilitation in your world and it's way more empowering. So that's where we go. If you can live more in that state, then you have so many more options, because then it's easier to bounce into the through me state, which is another place we like to play. Our two main areas to play in is the by me and the through me state.
I love that. So I'm sure our audience is kind of like, okay, I get an idea that, these are stages, or they're not stages, that they're more states and that you can oscillate between them. So maybe we should talk about each of the levels so that they can kind of get an idea of what to expect in each level and kind of the ups and the downs of each, and maybe how they contrast with each other. And then,
We definitely need to do that, because I did the quickest overview ever. So you can refer back 1,000 times. just rewind and then jump, rewind, jump.
Yeah, it's like we give the intro to, okay, here's the overview of the levels, and then here's the detail.
Exactly. So level 1, as I said, is to me, and it's seen as the victim state, because everything in your world is happening to you. And it's fueled by blame, and it's disempowering because the circumstances control everything. If it's raining outside and you don't like it when it rains, then you're sad. If somebody brings you a present and you love presents, then you're happy. It's all coming from the outside in onto us. And as I mentioned in the just quick intro, it's defined by defensiveness, like protecting yourself, and a need to be right. You have to fight for that right position. So if you think the world is crashing in, You need to defend that position that the world is failing. You come up with all the reasons. It's very story driven, past driven. It's a lot about what we talk about getting out of our story and seeing what's really happening. It's also driven by natural survival. So it's not bad necessarily. We could just act in a different way unless we're in a real survival setting.
Right. You know, at least in business, I'd love to expand on this just slightly and kind of put on the perspective of the fight versus flight response. That is a survival instinct. That is a survival response. When we used to live out in the wilderness before we had homes and suburbias, you know, if a lion was running and trying to eat us and attack us, our adrenaline would start rushing from our kidneys and it would rush blood to our hands, arms, and legs so that we could either run from the threat or fight the threat. And our muscles would be powered that way. In modern day society, we still have that physiological response, but oftentimes it's not a lion or a leopard that's trying to eat us or attack us. It's a situation at work that didn't pan out how we had hoped. You know, maybe we made a mistake or someone else made a mistake and now we have to deal with the fallout of that. Or maybe it's in a relationship where there was a miscommunication and now you have to have this tense conversation and try to create a clear communication or a common ground. And what ends up happening and why I like that these are considered states and not really stages is, again, just because this is level 1 doesn't mean that this is a wrong level. I think this is the instinctual level for a reason. It's kind of our default. It's what we go to. And the power comes in of recognizing, okay, this situation is happening around me and this is where I'm at right now. The power comes in my opinion, of when we recognize what level we're in and deciding how to move from that spot. Because awareness is where the key really comes in here, and the ability to acknowledge what is happening to you, but not to say what is happening to you and you have no control over it. Now, obviously, if you're getting eaten by like a shark or a lion, there's only so much you can do. But 9 out of 10, the situations that are happening in life that cause that same physiological reaction aren't life or death, but they make it feel that way because it makes it feel like it's happening to you. Where the 15 levels of commitment to leadership come in is they go, okay, this situation is happening. And we kind of hinted this already. How do you get above the line? How do you get from to me to by me? And that by me is that level 2. And that's, I guess, where we'll go next.
Yeah. Do you want to lead that one?
Sure. So level 2 is going to be your state of personal responsibility. And we've talked about this before. This is like one of our favorite topics to talk about is personal responsibility.
We have a whole podcast on it.
A whole podcast. So you can know that this is like one of our favorite little words. But it's when you finally get to this state of achievement from working hard on what you want. There is a level of activeness instead of receptivity in this level. There is a commitment to moving towards a particular goal. And the way that this comes around is you begin to, well, let's back up. Let's go to the level 1 example I was talking about earlier. You had a situation at work, let's say, and let's say someone made a mistake and you have to fix that mistake and you're really ticked off about it, right? And so your adrenaline's rushing and you can either run from the situation and just let them deal with the fallout, but you know that you have the skill set to make this situation better. You can either look at it as this person made a mistake and it's making my life miserable. It is happening to me. Or you can get open and curious about it. Okay, this situation happened. I'm feeling a certain type of way about it, maybe frustrated or ticked off. And I can either fight and flight. I can either, freeze or try to bury my head in the sand and not deal with the issue. Or maybe ask a question around it. What could I do in this situation? What are my options? If I have too much time, or if I don't have enough time, I have too much work of my own, what are other options? Could I delegate this? And so what happens is you turn the situation on its head. And when that happens, there's several things that occur, kind of like a cascade effect. First of all, the curiosity creates an openness to the situation. And by opening up to the situation and by asking questions, you're shifting your mindset out of that instinctual survival physiological reaction, and you're stepping into a more conscious level reaction to the situation around you. And when that happens, there's this little like nugget of change that begins to occur because there's a different energy around the situation. And if you're listening and you can think about it, think about a time where there was something that came up in your life that was super stressful or made you nervous or concerned. But instead of falling to that level of survival instinct, that level one of it happening to me, maybe it was a different choice, or maybe it was just you instinctually went to a different level, but you decided to handle it differently. And because you handled it differently, it created this effect of change where everyone else around you handled the situation differently as well. And I really wish I had an example to make that less generic. Jen, do you kind of?
Yeah, well, another part of this that I left out for the things happening to me is that level is filled with blame. Something is happening and somebody or some circumstance or even myself is to blame for what's happening in this moment. So, it's kind of a downer. That thing's to blame. Dave's to blame. We started the podcast late and it's Dave's fault. Or it's raining outside and my internet went down. And so it's the universe's fault. Or I'm late for work because my alarm didn't go off, blaming that. Or I didn't set my alarm, so I'm just a big mess screw up. And that's level one. That's the to me. Things are happening to me. I'm creating my own problems. It's blame. And what happens when you go to level two is you let go of blame because it takes you away from what's actually happening in the world that you can create change to. Let's say the internet did go down. Instead of blaming the internet or the universe for not having that connectivity, as you move into the by me, my life happens by me, curiosity rises. Well, the internet's down. That's what it is. How do I choose to respond to the internet being down? It doesn't matter what caused it. Doesn't matter at all. But it's down. And I have a podcast to do with Dave, and we need internet. So I could call him up and be like, we're doing a phone podcast, or I could go to the library. Library has internet. So I'm going to be 10 minutes late, run in the library so I have internet access, or we need to do another day. It just takes all the energy of where I have no control in my life and things are horrible and I'm stressed and I'm angry and it's just wrong to, oh, look at all these options I have. I can take steps that make things happen. And it doesn't matter if Dave buys into what I'm going to do. He could still be pissed and not taking responsibility and blaming, Colorado for really bad internet access. But if I own my side, I can step it up and I can take my responsibility for my action and create change. And that's what this is about. It's just being able to own the reality we're in and change the way we respond to it.
I really like that. I'm not going to add to that. I'm just going to keep going. So I think part of this level two, this happening by me when you step into this personal responsibility is, and you've heard us talk about this before, you get out of the story, right? I really, really liked your example of the alarm not going off. That's a really great example of, I've even had times where I've seen the meme / I've done it myself where I've set my alarm on my calendar or on my calculator even. Like, I'm just so tired at night. Like, I'm not even paying attention to what I'm doing.
Yeah, I've set my alarm for PM.
Or that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so there are situations where it was by you, like you made the mistake.
My fault.
But it did happen to you too, where your alarm didn't go off. And so I think that is where, in particular, I really find the value in this. There are situations in life that do happen to you. And again, it's not that you have control over what is necessarily happening to you in that case. Maybe you did set your alarm wrong, or maybe someone outside of your control did make a mistake or do something that directly impacts you. Where the power in this comes in is taking the responsibility of what can you do by you, for you in this situation. if the alarm doesn't go off on time and you are late for work, you can be pissy and grumbling and move through your entire day with that cloud around your head that we're all familiar with when, we're late and we're rushing and you got to cut your shower time short and maybe you don't get to go get your Starbucks like coffee or your coffee at Starbucks.
Starbucks is.
See, I'm putting myself in the cloud and, your words get mumbled like that and you're just in this like haze. That's when you are in that level of to you. And so when you can let go of that, it doesn't change, by the way, what happened to you, but it changes how you handle what happened to you. And that's when you step into the power of by me. And there's a few ways that you can kind of look at this. One is through kind of like a stoic lens, right? Where you step out of the emotion and you just accept responsibility for the action. And they talk about this, by the way, too, because a lot of times I think responsibility, actually, let's divest here for a minute. Responsibility does not mean you take blame. That is something that is emphasized with the conscious leadership, with these 4 levels of consciousness. And I think it's important because Jen brought this up again with level 1 about the blame. It's not that you shift blame at level 1 to from whatever happened to you, and then you shift the blame and you take it on yourself. And because you are now the culprit, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that something happened and you can either blame the situation or you can take responsibility for your reaction and your response. Yeah. And that's a very stoic way of approaching it. What is your side of the road and what can you do? What can you do in this situation? And sometimes
it's really important not to get into that martyrdom.
Yeah.
Where, yes, throw the blame on me because I'm taking responsibility. Responsibility has nothing to do with blame. It's an ownership of the moment and what you can give back. It's not about somebody else screwed up, but you'll take the blame. No, we are not martyrs, and we're also not saving the world. It's not your responsibility to fix everything either. Sometimes we cannot fix it. All we can do is take ownership for our reaction, at least in this first level of there are multiple levels inside the levels too. Different ways you can play with it. In the consciousness, there was an article we read on the Conscious Leadership website, and they were talking about different games that you can play with these to make it a simpler. Just my response. How I respond is what I'm responsible for.
Right.
And then there's another level that it's a harder level. And it's a game too. It's still a game. And you play at whatever level of that game you can.
Absolutely. So we've kind of talked about the first 2 levels, and I think those weren't the most part of this conversation because that's where a lot of us spend our time, at least myself included in that. I think the next few levels are things that are, dare I say, a little bit more aspirational in the sense that they require a little bit more of an active process and active work. But I don't necessarily think that means that they're harder to get to. They're harder to get to in the sense that they require work, but it's because of what we carry with us as we go up these levels. It's kind of like that responsibility thing with the blame. Like, responsibility doesn't mean that you're taking the blame. And so learning about word choices and your interactions with the situations around you, I think is as you open yourself up more to those things, you kind of naturally flow into these levels.
Yeah, and I think that's why there's another harder part to the level by me, which
Sure.
Radical responsibility. Did you want to talk about that one?
Yes. We have talked about responsibility in our podcast before. We've talked about radical as a term in our podcast before. And this conscious leadership group also talks about radical responsibility. There are levels of responsibility worth noting at this level too. And, as Jen was saying, there's kind of 2 levels of responsibility. There's level 1, which is just responsibility. You're just taking ownership of your reaction and response to something. It's the alarm went off. I'm running late to work. Instead of being angry about it, I'm going to go take my shower, get the kids ready, get out the door and get to work. If I'm 5 minutes late, I'll say, hey, my alarm went off. I'm taking responsibility for it. That's kind of that initial introduction to level 2. But there's a second level within that level. There's a layer within the layer of radical responsibility. So this is like, you start at one level of responsibility, but then there's this even more nuanced, more pertinent, more.
Yeah, you're going pro at
Yeah.
personal responsibility.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yes, you're going pro. You are not only responsible, you are writing a book on responsibility. Like, it is your bellywick. That is radical responsibility. So when situations happen, radical responsibility is, okay, the alarm went off. I'm going to, not only are you going to pivot that day and like not let it bother you, but you're going to come up with a solution for the future of like how you're going to prevent this happening again to you. It's very proactive. It's not just reactive. So level 1 responsibility, at least in my head, and maybe Jen can add to this as well, but level 1 responsibility to me is being responsible for your reaction. Level 2, that radical responsibility, is like the next step above that, where you are moving into a space of possibility. And it's not just a reaction, you're being proactive.
Yeah. If you put it into a relationship scenario, level 1 would be if your spouse is angry and they jump at you and they're just like grouchy and defensive. The first nuance to it would be, I own my response. I don't have to lash out back. I don't have to play those manipulative games where, well, you said and you're wrong. You can rise above, take responsibility for your reaction, and try to work with your partner. But they're angry. That's on them. That's the whole thing. That's not yours. There's like a barrier between it. So that's the first stoic. I've got my response. The radical responsibility is, how am I a co-creator in his anger? It's the next, or her anger, depending on who your spouse is. It's the next level. I am taking ownership for my response to my partner. And I'm always saying, how did I co-create this anger? Is there something that I did where I wasn't supportive in some way? Now, this is not being the hero. It's just taking it to the next level where, if you start to see how you might have played into this and it helped create the anger because they're in their to me state, in the future, you have more power to help, which is what Dave was getting to. You're creating more of your future. You're saying, how can you evolve your world for you? How did I help make my spouse angry or contribute to his anger? And then you have a little power to help that out. And it's just playful. It's a game. You don't have to change your spouse's anger. You can't change your spouse's anger, especially if it came from work. But maybe if there was something when you got home that you were just joyful, maybe you were flat or distracted, and that just added to the anger. But if you would have been present and saw them, their anger would have diminished. So you have power.
And I want to add here, this is a very nuanced thing, because I can hear our audience going, okay, but so-and-so, my spouse, partner, colleague, coworker, manager did X, Y, and Z. And if I take responsibility for co-creating, then they don't have to take responsibility. And I just want to point out, that's the blame mindset.
Yeah.
So
It doesn't matter what they do.
yeah, just because you take responsibility doesn't mean you are excusing or dismissing the behavior of the other person. It just means you are doing this radical thing of completely taking control of what you can control, which ends at your skin, basically. You are in control of you. That's it. And so all you can do is show up and be present for you and for the other person and acknowledge your side of the street. And there's so much power in that. And I feel like personally, especially as I struggle with this and learn to go through these levels, there's always that little voice in my head that goes, well, okay, if I take responsibility for this and they don't, I'm going to be, like there's this almost like little competitiveness. But what I have found so freaking fascinating to me as I've gone through these levels myself and in these situations that come up is 9 out of 10, if I take responsibility first, the other person jumps on the same bandwagon because you haven't diffused the energy. That's level 1, taking responsibility. Level 2, that radical responsibility, you've changed the energy. you've completely created a different reality where you
We
are.
said it would be a little woo-woo.
Yeah, we did say it would be a little woo-woo, but you have stepped into a space that might not have been accessible had you stayed at level 1 or kind of level 1 of level 2, just in regular responsibility. And we're not saying that every situation maybe even requires going to this level. However, there's a lot of power in trying to get to this level, in stepping into this level. And the situations where this is helpful, I think this should be considered.
Yeah. And it's really interesting if you can do it without resentment, because if you have resentment, then you're kind of in the to me and the responsibility. Like, I'm doing all this, but you're not playing.
Yeah.
But it's not the cool thing that happens is if it's open and honest and you're playing your game, the other person unconsciously starts to follow. It's if I'm open enough to say, I co-created this, the other person looks at it, oh yeah, and I see where I played my part. It doesn't happen instantly the first time you try it, but over time they start to take your patterns because you are a happier person. And that's what people want. They want to be happier. And it just kind of starts to filter off on your partner or your coworkers, even if they don't know what you're doing exactly. You
Yeah.
don't have to put it out there in the world like, what I'm doing is taking responsibility and radical responsibility at that. And you would do well to do that as well. No, you just live it.
I actually have a really great example of this, I feel. So, really quick story. And this is a business example, and I feel like we don't always share a bunch of like business stories. And since I'm the sage of creative scaffolding and that's my bread and butter, I'm going to share a story. So, what happened is a few weeks ago, there was a situation at work where something blew up. Something in our system just did not work the way it was supposed to. And it was one of those things where it was a myriad of issues that led to this. It was a lack of controls in place. It was a lack of responsibility of taking ownership of certain processes within our business. And I personally had to be the one to explain to the higher up managers of what happened. And I think this happens a lot in businesses. These issues come up and someone is immediately usually goes to level 1 of blame. Who else can I blame so that when the heat comes down about this thing breaking or not working, I don't have to be in the hot seat? And that's a lot of to me. That's a lot of that level 1 survival instinct. It's that fight or flight or freeze. Do I freeze up when the issues come up? Do I fight? Do I try to like push the blame? Or do I flee? Do I try to like bury my head in the sand and distance myself from the issue as much as possible? In any of those situations, you'll see that there's this kind of breakdown of not only responsibility, but ownership of the issue. And so you're denying the potential of your ability to create and grow from the situation if you're connected to it. And so what happened in this situation is I chose to go to radical responsibility and I just took on the whole issue myself, not as a superhero. I didn't take the blame. I just took responsibility. I made sure that we had a explanation of what happened, that we kind of had solutions and step-by-steps of what we wanted to do. And I had a few people help me write this up, right? Like we wrote up a little explanation of what happened. Here's kind of the process, the details. And after everyone wrote everything, I went back through and I took out all the blame language. Anytime, well, this department was supposed to do this, or so-and-so was supposed to make sure this happened and it didn't, I took all that out. I just kept it to very, very neutral and top level. This was supposed to happen. It didn't happen. This is what we're going to do to fix it. And what is so interesting to me and why I brought it up is, again, the situation changed where I have dealt with issues with this company in the past. And when issues come up and we stick to the blame language, it often divulges into, well, we need to have another meeting. We need to discuss this over email. We need to follow up on this. There's this whole cascade of almost problem solving that comes down from it. But instead, I chose something else. I chose radical responsibility. I chose to take responsibility just for my side. There were many other departments that could have and should have helped with this issue, but I took responsibility just for my side. And when we presented it, I made sure to remove the blame language. Those two things alone changed it so that by the end of the call, instead of the higher ups being pissy and upset, they were actually laughing and like smiling at the end of the call. And it wasn't because they were thrilled that we had an issue. It was because instead of them focusing on all the blame and the kind of to us as a company, we all were collectively able to go, okay, by us, what can we do to correct this issue? And because that mindset changed, the energy around the situation changed, and we were able to handle it, I think, a much quicker than otherwise had we focused on the blame. So that's just kind of an example of how when you play with these two levels and just take care of your side of it, there can be change that exponentially grows around you.
Yeah. And this is why in shadow casting, we are pushing in almost all of our podcasts for this by me energy, because your world will shift. It is crazy. People rally around you. People want to help. You get the laugh from the higher ups instead of the blame and 15 more meetings. It's really empowering. We spent a lot of time on this podcast focusing on this because it changes your life in so many ways. Next level. All right. Our next level is the through me state. And this one's so cool because once you've gotten that nuance of radical responsibility, it becomes playful. It becomes more fun. And you start to go within more because you realize circumstances, yeah, they're there. Reality is what it is. And this energy starts to boil from within you and express outward into the world. Here's what I want to create. Here is my purpose. Here is what I'm bringing to the world. What happens comes into me, through me, and out into the world. This is crazy fun because ideas, it's basically our motivation podcast that we did 2 weeks ago. It's what it is. It's that different motivation.
Right. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So I really like that because if you take it at a very top level, then level 1 and 2 is kind of like outside happening in, right?
Mhm.
It's to me, by me, as in there's this situation around me and it's affecting how I respond. Whereas I feel levels 3 and 4 turn that on its head. It's there's something coming outside of me. And as situations happen, what's coming outside of me and through me is what's responding to the situation. And it's a very, oh God, keep saying this word, but it is a very nuanced approach. There's a little bit of a shift that occurs here between level 2 and 3. And I think what really comes in for me, the nuance difference is that 2 is about radical responsibility, 3 is about purpose. So
Yeah.
2 is a response and a reaction to something. 3 is a level of, like you said, being. It's something that is inside of me, regardless of what's happening around me. Whereas level 2 is, okay, this specific situation came up. This is how I'm going to handle it. Level 3 is, and this is just who I am. This is core to who I am. And regardless of whether something good, negative, bad, or otherwise, or neutral is happening to me, this is my innate response. And why I think this is why it's important that we emphasize that this isn't stages is that at some level you have a default. I see Jen thinking. So at some level you have a default response. This goes back to our podcast that we hit on all the time. Your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits. You are always operating, not always. Typically we operate from a default. And that default is this level 3, where the power and the growth comes in is as we uncover radical responsibility, as we learn to take ownership for our reactions and our responses, our level 3 cultivates in a different way. Instead of our default response being from these external factors that we learn from our parents, from society, from religion, from our culture, it comes from the inside and we become more aligned with who we are on the inside. And that's where level 3 really begins to shine.
Yeah. And I can hear our audience being, Dave, Jen, you just told us our natural state, it's level 1. And now you're telling us our natural state is level 3. Okay.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, they're both true. The survival is that making it in the world just barely. It's survival. And it is a state that serves us well. It's the one we come into that protects us. And if you go back, we have a podcast on purpose. And we talk about the fact that purpose is something we're always doing. We are always living in our purpose. And the only thing that changes is we become conscious of the fact of what our purpose is. And then we can act on it, awake and aware, and make it bigger, make it better. And this is what level 3 does. Once we take responsibility, it's the energy. It's like I said when I first brought this up, it starts to rise from the inside out. It's when you start making changes because you want to and you can, not because you necessarily want an outcome. It's where your diet changes because something inside of you says, I want to eat differently. And then you end up losing weight, which is a really cool byproduct. I mean, we don't go into stuff planning on gaining lots of weight and getting overweight and unhealthy. We're driven from a defense mechanism because food is yummy and we like pleasure. And in some cultures, food and gatherings is how we connect. And so we eat, and then the byproduct is we're out of shape and unhealthy. This is the opposite. This is where we're starting to move from the inside out. And the byproduct is health and happiness and joy and betterment.
Ooh, okay. My mind's going to try this. Let's see if we can do it.
Okay.
Here's what's happening. When you move to that space that Jen is talking about, let's take the diet and the eating and the weight, because personally, that's been a personal struggle of mine. It's something that I've been working on. It goes back to what we were hitting on, the blame mindset. When you are at level 3, okay, hold on. I'm even trying to see how to connect all this. I'm just going to start talking. So we don't go out and we're like, oh, I'm just going to start eating unhealthy and I'm just going to gain all this weight because that's what I want to do. Oftentimes it's a reaction to stuff that's happening around us because we're looking for someone and something to blame. And so when shit goes south and goes sideways and hits the fan, sometimes we have habits, actions, and behaviors that are detrimental to where our goals and our health and our growth are. It's not that we go, we want to be unhealthy. It's that sometimes we choose the food or the, I don't know, I can say, yeah, food, drugs. So, yeah, you choose.
Instant gratification. You just need something good in your life now.
Exactly. And what happens is you create a response mechanism. You go, something bad in my life happened. I have a go-to instant gratification response. And it's just rinse and repeat because life is full of challenges. I mean, that is the nature of life. And I say this a lot, and I don't know if I've said it on our podcast yet, but superhero movies would be so boring if the superhero got powers and then sat on their ass for an hour and a half. No one wants to go and pay money to see that movie. Yeah, right? Yeah, like they're just sitting on the couch eating a bag of potato chips. Like, can you imagine Captain America? No one wants to watch that. Who wants to watch a superhero watching something on TV? No one.
We didn't watch the movie where Thor got fat. We just see that he got there.
Yes. And that's a great example. We see Thor through Love and Thunder go through growth, go through change. He moved out of the by me and the to me to the as me and through me. I mean, he really shifted because he had the responsibility of a kid in that movie and he had to take ownership for his part in what happened, even though other people didn't take ownership for their parts, like Thanos, for example. Anyways, I got a little sidetracked, but what I'm getting to is that when you're in the levels 1 and 2, there's that blame mentality. When you get to the level 3, there's this kind of release because it's no longer about what's happening outside of you. It's all happening what's inside of you. You're not losing weight and you're not focusing on your health because you're trying to correct a instant gratification behavior or because you're trying to, I don't know, lose weight to like, what I'm trying to get to is that it comes from the inside. Instead of it being this outside motivation, it's an internal one. And that internal motivator is so much stronger than anything outside yourself.
Especially once you've gotten a radical responsibility because you've gotten good at it. You're used to just doing things. And that's when all that external baggage, you just shake it off. Yeah. And that's when the inside can start saying, hey, how about we do this instead? Because you're going to love it in the long run. You're going to love it while you're doing it. And it really is where you start to play what I believe we've talked about in other episodes called the infinite game. And it's where you're creating things. It's not zero sum anymore. It's not this is right and that's wrong. It's I can play with the boundaries and they're not set and the rules aren't set. And what makes win-win situations and how can I have fun and what inspires me? And that's when you start casting that different shadow. And at this level, you really are starting to know the levels of consciousness. And there's a lot of compassion. And you really start to celebrate humanity because you can see it so clearly. So let's just highlight the fourth level because speaking personally, I don't spend much time there. I'm not there. It's above my pay grade, but I do visit it a little bit every once in a while. What I think it's that state of being connected with all things. Nothing comes through you. It's as me. You are everything. It's really that unity, woo-woo, enlightened spiritual point of view. It's a very high level. And the only thing that I can put with it personally, because apparently we go through all the levels, is moments when I've seen a spectacular sunrise or sunset. And it just puts me in a state of awe and everything's okay. It doesn't matter if kids are crying or joyful or being loud or it doesn't matter. Everything's just right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what level 4 is.
If I understand level 4, because I personally, just so the audience knows, because there's no ego here, right? Like, I think I'm kind of at like level 2 of level 2, like that radical responsibility moving into level 3, even though again, they're not stages, but that's kind of where I feel like I oscillate right now between kind of like that radical responsibility level 3. Level 4, to me, if level 1, 2, and 3, we were kind of talking about how these might be like flow states or default states, level 4 right now are moments. These are not things that happen for an extended period of time when I experience them. They're what I call these serendipitous moments. There's these little things that happen. Maybe I was thinking about someone and they call me, or maybe I was journaling a lot about wanting, I don't know, to
Maybe job opportunity, maybe.
Right. That's exactly what I was trying to phrase. Maybe I was journaling about how I wanted a new job opportunity and a new growth. And a week later, somebody messages me and says, hey, I know this is out of the blue, but I need someone that has this unique skill set, and that's you. And by the way, I'm going to pay you 10 times what you're making. I mean, I'm making that up a little bit, but it really is a little bit of a almost unbelievable situation. It's that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, like this is exactly what I've been wanting. And it's right here. It's this opportunity presenting itself. It's that serendipitous. If you follow The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, it's kind of that same concept of like good orderly direction. She also talks about serendipity. It's just these moments where everything perfectly aligns. And that could be from an opportunity to, I think, like Jen was kind of talking about, the beautiful sunset. And I mean, it's those quick, quiet moments when you're at a date with your spouse and you're just talking, but then you just have this moment of just complete gratitude and love for your partner. And then it goes, right? Because they probably say something, you're like, oh my God. And you're like, roll your eyes or whatever. But it's just that moment. And they're just moments right now. And I think I'm extrapolating completely here. I think when you start really stepping in this level, they stop being moments and they start being like the default. They become what you experience. But for right now, because I still have some of my own victim blame, non-radical responsibility mindset, it's hard to find more of these moments and to be present and open to these moments. This is something that comes to you and through you and as you. That's why it's as you. It's this interplay of all the other levels happening in this great dance at the same time. And it happens to align just ever so perfectly. And then it's gone. And I think that's really how this level speaks to me.
Yeah. It's if you live there, you're enlightened.
Mhm.
That's the thing. But we can have glimpses. And I think that's why we push to get out of victim mindset as the status quo. Once you move into responsibility, more opens up because you see the world differently. And as you move where the status quo is more level 3, then you have more opportunities to feel level 4. But you'll feel level 1 again too. It doesn't go away. They're just different places you sit in any given moment. But instead of having moments of level 4, you'll have moments of level 1. I think that's how it works out. And that's what I've experienced so far on my own journey. And I have nothing else to add on this. I hope the audience enjoyed it and got some interesting stuff. Maybe they'll want to go back to some of our other podcasts and be like, what was purpose? And it'll give it a different context.
Yeah. So in the comments, feel free to drop a note. What level do you feel that you operate from in the most? Do you agree with our assessment of these levels of consciousness? Do you feel that, where do you feel like you spend the most time? Where do you feel like you're trying to grow into? Did you learn anything from this podcast about maybe there are situations in your life where you weren't aware that you were passing the buck or the blame? We'd love to hear from you. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe from wherever you're listening.
Until next time.
See ya.